I wasn't supposed to be walking that way. The morning sun had barely crested over the tiled rooftops of Sant'Alba, painting the stone streets gold, when I noticed a small shape near the curb. At first, I thought it was trash, a wet rag maybe, but as I got closer, my heart lurched. It was a kitten, barely clinging to life, its tiny body stiff, not breathing. My hands moved before my mind caught up. The air smelled of sea salt and coming rain. I dropped to my knees, pulse pounding. I'd never done CPR on anything before, but I had to try. I don't remember thinking, only doing. I cupped his fragile body in my palms, still damp from dew or maybe his own fear. His mouth hung slightly open, eyes glazed. There was no sound, no movement, nothing. I tried to remember what I'd once read, maybe online or in some dog-eared book. Something about tiny compressions, breaths like whispers. My thumbs pressed gently on his chest, and I breathed a slow stream of air over his nose and mouth. Again. A truck passed a block away, rumbling on cobblestones, but everything in my world narrowed to the kitten. I was terrified he was already gone. But then something. A twitch, a hiccup, barely more than a ripple. I held my breath as his side moved again, this time more definite. He gasped. It was wet and awful and beautiful. I think I said, "Good boy," but my voice cracked. I wrapped him in my flannel overshirt and rushed down the hill toward Sophia's clinic, nearly slipping twice on the polished stones. I kicked open the door without thinking, startling an old woman in the waiting room. Sophia took one look at me, at the trembling bundle in my arms, and rushed forward. "What happened?" she asked. "CPR," I said. That was all I had. She was already clearing a space, barking orders at the vet assistant. I stood back, hands shaking, soaked with sweat and kitten breath. I didn't know if Nico would live, but I knew I couldn't walk away. Sophia worked fast, her hands moving with the quiet confidence of someone who's seen too much to panic anymore. She set up a heat lamp, slipped a tiny oxygen mask over Nico's face, and massaged his paws like she was coaxing life back into them. "He's hypothermic," she muttered, "and in shock, but he's fighting." I stood back, barely breathing. The clinic smelled like antiseptic and lavender. Sophia's touch, always trying to make sterile places feel a little warmer. Dario showed up not long after, leaning on his cane and muttering that he'd seen me run like a man possessed. "That kitten," he said, peering over his glasses, "was already gone, no?" I didn't answer. Maybe he was right. Maybe I'd just interrupted death mid-sentence. As the day stretched on, Nico's breathing grew steadier, but his body remained limp. Alessio, the vet, came in and examined him. "We wait," he said simply. "Sometimes that's the best we can do. But waiting doesn't sit well with the heart." By afternoon, Martina arrived, notebook in hand, wide-eyed and ready to catalog every detail. "Are we going to put him up for adoption?" she asked. "Or will someone keep him?" I didn't answer. I didn't know. There was an unspoken split forming in the room. Martina hoped for rehoming. Sophia was already thinking long-term care. Dario thought the whole effort was wishful thinking. And me? I was stuck somewhere between fear and fierce, irrational hope. I couldn't imagine walking away from that tiny body ever again. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, listening to the wind stir the fig trees outside my window, every rustle reminding me of the rise and fall of Nico's fragile chest. At dawn, I went back to the clinic. Sophia was already there, sitting beside the incubator. Her face was tired, her eyes rimmed red. "He had a seizure around 3, she said quietly. Small, but it shook him hard. My stomach dropped. I hadn't even considered neurological damage. He could have gone without oxygen for too long, she added. We won't know what kind of brain function he has until later. I stared at Nico, his body still so tiny under the warming light, a pulse flickering at his throat. I remembered the way his limbs had stiffened in the street, the silence of his chest. Was I too late? Had I saved a life only to give him one filled with pain? Sophia handed me a clipboard, blood test results, electrolyte levels, some notes scribbled at 3:15 a.m. He's hanging on, she said, but he's not out of the woods. And that was when I saw it. A slight twitch, his paw jerked once, then again, reaching toward the glass like he was swimming in a dream. I pressed my hand to the side of the incubator and whispered his name. He opened his eyes, just for a second. It wasn't much, but it was enough to tear something open in me. Hope, terror, responsibility, all tangled together. I didn't realize how attached I'd already become until Sophia said the words out loud. "We don't know if he'll walk or see properly. You should be prepared for that." Her voice was kind but clinical, the way it always was when she needed to protect herself from outcomes she couldn't change. Martina wasn't having it. "He opened his eyes, didn't he? He moved. That has to mean something." She knelt beside the incubator like a believer at an altar. She was crying, but smiling too. Maybe he's just slow to come back. Maybe he just needs more time. Dario scoffed, arms folded, leaning on his cane. "You're all dreaming. That kitten's broken. Keeping him alive like this, it's not kindness, it's cruelty." His words landed like stones in my gut. But I didn't argue. I just looked at Nico. His eyes were shut again, but his chest still rose and fell, soft and rhythmic. There was something stubborn in it, like he didn't know how to quit. Sophia sighed and pulled off her gloves. "I'm not giving up on him, but someone's gonna have to be realistic. If he makes it through this week, he'll need long-term rehab, a home, around-the-clock care." That was when everyone looked at me. I didn't know what I was gonna say. I just knew that walking away felt impossible now. But keeping him, that felt terrifying in a different way. Because what if I wasn't enough? What if none of us were? The following day, news of Nico's rescue made its way through the village faster than I expected. Maybe someone saw me running with him, or maybe word just travels faster when it's wrapped in drama. Either way, people started to show up. First came Lucia, the woman from the bakery, holding a tiny bundle of soft blankets she thought might help. "My daughter outgrew them," she said. "Use them for him. He deserves something warm." Then came Father Remo, the parish priest, asking if the kitten would be blessed at Sunday service, which, to be honest, I didn't even know was a thing. But he insisted. "God sees even the smallest lives," he said with a gentle smile. But the warmth didn't last. On the clinic's front door, someone had taped a note in block letters. "Putting animal suffering above common sense is selfish." Sophia crumpled it in one hand. "We're not starting this again," she muttered. Apparently, this wasn't the first time villagers had pushed back on her more compassionate cases. They think if a cat isn't useful, it's not worth saving. And then came the worst part, a call from the landlord. Apparently, the shelter portion of the clinic, which Sophia had built with her own savings, was under review. Noise complaints, vet care for hopeless animals. They wanted to revoke her expansion permit. I looked at Nico, still curled like a comma in his incubator, breathing in small, shallow waves. He had no idea the fight wasn't just for his life, it was for everyone who believed he mattered. That evening, the village was quiet in the way only coastal towns can be after the sun dips beneath the sea, slow, heavy, and steeped in the scent of salt, old plaster, and lingering heat from sun-warmed stone. I sat alone in my workshop, the windows open to the rustling of fig leaves, the scent of cedar dust still hanging in the air like something unfinished. The lamp above my bench cast a soft yellow glow over the half-carved chair leg resting beneath my hands, but the chisel remained untouched, its weight dull and useless against the wood. My fingers, calloused and worn, felt distant from me, like they belonged to someone else. Someone who could still focus, still pretend that life outside the clinic went on as normal. But everything had changed. Nico's face kept pressing into the back of my thoughts, his small features twisted in that vulnerable stillness, as if caught between sleep and surrender. I saw his trembling breath beneath the glass, the almost imperceptible flicker of life clinging to him like a thread in a windstorm. Sophia's words repeated themselves with quiet insistence. "If he survives, he'll need care around the clock, constant, delicate." That kind of care didn't just ask for time, it demanded a life reshaped, days rewritten, sleep abandoned, routines discarded. And still, none of it frightened me more than the idea of letting him go, of handing him off to someone else, of trusting that they would see him the way I did now, not as a burden or a broken case, but as something impossibly brave. And yet beneath that fierce pull to keep him close, lived something darker, quieter, harder to admit. I couldn't untangle whether I wanted to save Nico for his sake or for mine, whether I saw a creature worth saving or a reflection of my own need to matter, to do something that couldn't be undone. The thought hollowed me out in a way I hadn't expected. It felt like standing at the edge of something I couldn't name, with nothing but instinct and a stubborn flicker of hope to guide me. by the third day, the village air had turned. The breeze that once carried the smell of warm bread and sun-soaked rosemary now carried whispers, sharp-edged, half-heard murmurs that followed me from the market stalls to the clinic gates. People nodded less when I passed. Some looked away entirely, and though no one said it directly, I could feel the shift, like a tide beginning to pull. One morning I arrived at the clinic early, just as Sophia was unlocking the side door, only to find a folded sheet of paper taped to the glass. No name, no signature, just 7 words scribbled in pen, each one colder than the last. Stop wasting effort on what can't be fixed. Inside, the clinic was too still. The machines hummed their quiet vigil, and Nico remained tucked beneath the warmth of the heat lamp, his breathing steady but shallow, his legs still limp. He hadn't seized again, not that Sophia had seen, but he hadn't moved either. The vet, Alessio, examined him again that afternoon and gently voiced what none of us wanted to say aloud. "If there's no change by the end of the week," he said, "we may have to consider quality of life. We don't want to keep him alive just because we're afraid of what it means not to." I nodded, but the words didn't land. I looked at Nico, not as a case, not as a body under glass, but as something alive. And I wasn't ready to lose him to logic. By the 4th evening, a slow, almost imperceptible shift took place inside the clinic. Nico didn't spring to life. There was no miracle moment, no triumphant mule or stretching of legs, but something in him stirred. His ears twitched when I spoke his name softly through the incubator walls, and once, when Sophia adjusted the oxygen line, his head leaned slightly toward her hand, as though the weight of the world had finally lessened, even by a gram. These tiny, fragile responses should not have meant much, but to us, they were thunder. Martina, who had started coming by after school every day, began logging Nico's movements like a ritual. "Second blink," she'd whisper, "more alert than yesterday." She knitted tiny cloth mice from leftover yarn and placed one beside the heat pad, convinced he would need toys once he woke fully. Her optimism was reckless, pure, and it began to bleed into me in ways I hadn't expected. I found myself imagining what it might feel like to hear his paws on my wooden floors, to see him curled in the warm corner by the stove where the light always hit in the mornings. I didn't say it aloud, but I had already moved his future into my home, piece by piece. But for every hopeful spark, there was a weight. Sophia was stretched thin between cases. The landlord's threats grew more pointed, letters now bearing official stamps. Dario had stopped visiting altogether, though I caught him watching from across the street, arms crossed, his disapproval as constant as the village bells. The deeper our bond with Nico grew, the louder the outside world seemed to remind us that love wasn't enough. Not in the face of resources, time, or reason. Still, I stayed, and he kept breathing. And that felt like enough for now. The tension broke 5 days in, though not in the way any of us expected. It was late afternoon. The clinic cloaked in the golden hush that comes just before sundown, when Martina let out a soft gasp from Nico's corner. At first we thought it was another blink, another small twitch of a paw. But when we reached the incubator, the glass fogged from his breath, we realized the toy mouse she'd left had been nudged ever so slightly to the side. A new position, a change, a movement he hadn't made before. Sophia crouched low, shining her penlight along his spine, watching closely as his head tilted, just barely, toward the light. "That's purposeful," she said under her breath, as though afraid to shatter the fragile hope taking shape between us. "That's not reflex." Martina grinned so wide it almost looked like relief. I felt something break open in my chest, an ache, sharp and sweet, because I knew what came next. If he could move even slightly, then the next step would be harder. It would mean decisions, serious ones. That evening, after Alessio finished his rounds, Sophia sat me down at the front counter beneath the dim light of the clinic's waiting room. The walls around us still bore posters about flea treatments and low-cost spay programs, but the air between us had shifted. "You know," she said gently, "we're getting close to the point where you'll have to choose. He'll need someone full-time now, someone committed. It won't be a clean path. There will be setbacks, expense, sleepless nights. He'll be fragile for a long time, maybe forever." I nodded slowly, eyes unfixed, voice quiet. But he moved. He chose to move. It wasn't a declaration, it was a reckoning. the beginning of the part where hope turns into responsibility. The following morning began with silence, and not the peaceful kind. When I stepped to the clinic, Sophia was already pacing, her phone clenched tightly in one hand, her other running through her hair like it was trying to find an answer. Her voice hadn't yet formed. The shelter permit had been formally revoked. Effective immediately, the back half of the clinic, the part that held Nico's incubator, Martina's hand-knit mice, and our entire fragile world, was no longer legally permitted to house animals overnight. We had 48 hours. After that, fines would follow. I felt the air change inside me, like a door slamming shut. The dream of stability, of letting Nico heal in that safe corner under Sophia's watchful eye, dissolved as quickly as it had formed. And just like that, the question we'd tiptoed around for days became real. "He'll have to go somewhere," Sophia said, her voice low, almost apologetic. "Either the main clinic if we sneak it, or home with someone. But this place isn't safe anymore, not for him." Martina's face crumpled, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as she whispered, "But he's still not ready." No one disagreed, not even Alessio. But logic wasn't king anymore. Time was. The walls were closing in. Sophia turned to me then, not asking with words, but with the weight in her eyes. I didn't need her to say it. I felt it in my chest, in my hands, in the thought I hadn't dared admit aloud. He's mine already, isn't he? But I hesitated, not because I didn't want him, but because wanting him wasn't the same as being ready. Could I carry him through what came next without breaking something in him, or in me? The silence pressed in, waiting for an answer. That night, I didn't go home. I stayed in the workshop, pacing between half-finished furniture and scattered tools, surrounded by the smell of dry wood and unfinished plans. The space felt foreign now, like a version of my life that had quietly slipped behind me. My hands itched to carve, to sand, to do something that would bring order back into the mess, but I couldn't make them move. I was no longer just a man with a quiet trade and a rhythm he understood. I was standing on the edge of a new life, and it terrified me. I pictured Nico in that incubator, his breath soft and steady, the slight tilt of his head whenever someone said his name. Not a fluke, not a reflex, a choice, a quiet defiance of everything that had tried to take him. And now, here I was, being asked to make a choice of my own. Not in theory, not one day, but now. In 2 days, the space he lived in would be shut down. Sophia could bend rules, but not break them. Alessio had already made it clear. If Nico didn't have a place to go, he'd have to be moved into shared care. A shelter up north had room. They wouldn't know him. Wouldn't have seen him that first morning, when death hovered like a shadow and breath was a miracle. They'd try, maybe, but they wouldn't understand. That thought broke me in a quiet, bitter way. I sank to the floor, my back against the wall, and buried my face in my arms. I wasn't crying, not really, but something inside me was unraveling, something soft and scared and utterly human. I didn't know if I could give him what he needed, but I knew I couldn't hand him off to someone who didn't see him as more than a case file. By the time the sun began to rise, painting the rooftops of Sant'Alba in honeyed gold, I had made my choice. It didn't arrive like a lightning strike or a flash of sudden certainty. It came slowly, quietly, like the sea creeping back across the sand, inevitable and strangely calm. I walked to the clinic with the morning light at my back, the streets still damp from the night's dew. My hands trembled slightly as I pushed open the door. The smell inside, clean linen, antiseptic, and the faintest trace of milk, was familiar now, like a second skin. Sophia looked up from her paperwork, her eyes tired but watchful. She didn't speak, only studied my face, as if waiting to see which version of me had walked through that door. I gave her the answer without ceremony. "I'll take him." Her breath caught for a second. No smile, no congratulations, just a soft nod and something deep behind her eyes that shimmered between gratitude and fear. "You're sure?" she asked. I wasn't, not completely, but that wasn't the point anymore. I walked over to the incubator and looked down at Nico. His eyes were closed, his breathing even, one paw curled near his face like he was mid-dream. He didn't know what had been decided. He didn't know the risk or the weight or the cost. He just slept. And somehow that trust, unspoken, undeserved, was what made the choice real. I placed a small cedar box on the counter. Inside were folded cloths, soft blankets, a quiet place to begin again. Sophia helped lift him gently, cradling him in the towel like a secret not yet spoken aloud. And in that moment, as he nestled against my chest, still frail but undeniably alive, I knew I hadn't saved him. He'd saved me too. It's been 3 weeks since I brought Nico home. The house feels different now, less like a place to return to, more like something that's growing, reshaping itself with every soft paw step on the floor. He still struggles to walk in a straight line. His balance is uncertain, his legs sometimes forget how to work together, and his meows come out hoarse and uncertain. But every sound he makes feels like a declaration. I'm still here. I'm still trying. He sleeps curled beside the stove, exactly where I once imagined him, the morning light wrapping around his body like a promise I never knew I made. Martina visits sometimes, bringing new toys and stories from the clinic. Sophia stops by after her shift, just to check on him, though she always ends up staying longer than she means to. Even Dario, grumbling the whole way, dropped off a basket of fish scraps last Thursday. For the stubborn little thing, he muttered. But not everything has a tidy ending. The shelter portion of the clinic remains closed. Donations trickle in, but they're not enough yet. And Nico's future? Still uncertain. He may never be fully healthy. He may always need extra care. And yet, he's alive. He breathes. He looks up when I say his name. If there's anything this has taught me, it's that rescue isn't a straight line. It's messy, unfinished, and often full of impossible choices. But sometimes, the act of holding on, despite everything, is the very thing that transforms you. If Nico's story stayed with you, if you found something in it that reminded you of your own quiet battles, your own need to hold on when the odds said let go, then maybe there's something more here than just a kitten's rescue. Maybe there's a reason you're watching this now. Rescue isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it's one breath, one blink, one small, trembling paw moving toward the light. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs reminding that the smallest lives still matter, that hope doesn't need permission, and that even in the most uncertain moments, we can choose to show up with our fear, our love, and our hands open. Subscribe if you'd like to follow more of Nico's journey, or the journeys of others like him who rewrite what it means to survive. Because sometimes, the smallest stories are the ones that change us the most.